The Discovery Commander Thelax of the Kryn Authority had seen many strange things in his 40 years of station management, but nothing quite like this. He stood in the corridor of Habitat Ring 7, staring at row after row of quarters that should have been occupied by human personnel. The doors were all sealed properly. The environmental systems showed normal shutdown procedures had been followed, but every single room was empty, sir. It's the same on rings 4 through 9, his deputy reported, her antenna quivering with confusion. 2,347 humans, all gone. Their belongings, their personal effects, everything removed. It's like they were never here. Thelax accessed his datapad, scrolling through the station roster. Dr. Sarah Chen, Xenobiology. Marcus Webb, Antimatter Containment Specialist. Yuki Tanaka, Agricultural Systems Engineer. Names he'd seen every day for years. Humans he'd nodded to in passing but never really known. They'd been background noise in the grand opera of the station's multi-species community. Check the security logs, he ordered. Someone must have seen them leave. But the logs showed nothing unusual. No mass gathering, no exodus parade, no tearful goodbyes. Over the course of 7 rotations, humans had simply finished their shifts, returned to their quarters, and by the next morning, vanished. Across the station's commercial district, Sarathi Merchant Velshara discovered her human inventory manager's office meticulously organized, all accounts balanced to the credit, and a simple handwritten note. Thank you for the opportunity. All pending orders are in the system. Good luck. The same phrase appeared in hundreds of locations across the station. Polite, professional, final. By the time Thelax reported to Sector Command, similar reports were flooding in from across Council space. The humans were gone. All of them. The pattern emerges. The Galactic Census Bureau in its 1,000-year history had never conducted an emergency population audit. But 3 days after the first reports, Chief Census Officer Mira Shan stood before a holographic display that made her blood run cold. 732 million humans. The entire registered population of Council space gone, not scattered, not hiding, gone. Show me the exit vectors, she commanded. The display shifted, showing traffic control data from the past standard year. Hundreds of ships, most of them old, decommissioned colony vessels that humans had purchased as scrap, had departed from various ports. Always in small groups, never enough to raise alarms. Always with proper clearances, filed flight plans, and paid docking fees. They bought our garbage, breathed her assistant, a young Luxari whose crystalline face reflected the blue light of the display. All those obsolete ships, we were happy to sell them. They rebuilt them. Mira Shan zoomed in on the trajectory data. Every human ship had headed toward the galactic rim, beyond the Veil Nebula where sensor readings became unreliable, and few species bothered to explore. The flight plans claimed scientific surveys or resource prospecting, standard human activities that no one had questioned. How long? She asked quietly. Her assistant ran the calculations. Based on purchase records and departure dates. They've been planning this for at least 50 years, maybe longer, 50 years. 2 generations of humans quietly preparing to leave while maintaining the facade of integration, working their shifts, paying their taxes, smiling politely at the aliens who employed them. And no one had noticed. Mira Shan pulled up personnel files, searching for clues. Dr. James Morrison, Chief Human Medical Officer at the Vex Thari, hospital ship Valor's Edge, he'd trained 100 alien doctors in xenobiological surgery while quietly stockpiling medical supplies through legitimate purchase orders. Engineer Maria Santos had spent 30 years maintaining the Ansible relay network while secretly designing independent human communication systems. Ambassador Richard Jung had smiled and nodded through countless council sessions where humans were denied voting rights, all while coordinating the largest covert operation in galactic history. They'd been invisible. And then they'd made themselves absent. Council emergency session. The Chamber of Unity, built to celebrate galactic cooperation, had never felt so hollow. Ambassador Keshimura of the Luxari called the emergency session to order, her voice lacking its usual musical quality. Honored representatives, we face an unprecedented crisis. Humanity has departed Council space en masse. We must determine our response. Counselor Vrax of the Kryn slammed his chitinous appendage against his podium. Response? They've abandoned their contracts, violated their work agreements. We should issue arrest warrants, send pursuit vessels, To where exactly? Interrupted Ambassador Silvera of the Sarathi, her scaled features twisted in an expression that approached fear. They vanished beyond sensor range. And even if we found them, then what? Drag 700 million unwilling humans back to their jobs? They're essential personnel, Brax insisted. My people's medical facilities are already experiencing crisis conditions. Human doctors comprised 60% of our trauma surgery specialists. We literally cannot save our wounded without them. Perhaps, said Keshimura coldly. We should have considered training our own people in those specialties instead of relying on hiring humans at half the salary we pay our own citizens. The chamber fell silent. It was a truth everyone knew, but no one spoke. Humans were cheap labor, brilliant, adaptable, and willing to do the jobs other species considered beneath them. They worked longer hours for less pay, never demanded voting representation, and solved problems other races found intractable. They'd been perfect employees. Invisible infrastructure. I remember, Keshimura continued, her voice soft. 20 years ago, when Ambassador Zhang proposed that humans be granted a council seat, we laughed. We said humanity was too young, too fractious, too insignificant. We told them to earn their place through service. She gestured at the empty gallery where human observers once sat. They served. And now they've left, without demands, without threats, without asking our permission. But why? Asked young Councillor Threnix, newly appointed to the Draxi delegation. If they had grievances, why not voice them? We could have negotiated, could we? Keshimura accessed her historical files. 372 formal petitions from human labor unions over the past century. All denied or delayed indefinitely. 147 requests for citizenship pathways. All rejected. 69 applications for colony charters in human-specific territories. All approved only in the least desirable regions and always with restrictions. She displayed the documents for all to see. They did speak. For generations. We simply didn't listen. Ambassador Torval of the Vexathari, a warrior species that prided itself on honor, stood slowly. I trained under Dr. Sarah Chen. She saved my life twice, once on the operating table, once by teaching me that strength isn't only measured in combat. She never complained, never demanded recognition. His voice cracked slightly. I never thanked her. I never even learned where she came from, what she cared about beyond medicine. She was just there, always there. And now she's not, Keshimura said. None of them are. And we're beginning to understand what that means. Week 1. The first consequences. The Ansible relay at junction point Theta 9 failed on the 8th day. It was a minor station, connecting only a few dozen systems, so the initial impact seemed minimal. But Ansible relay stations were interconnected, each one supporting its neighbors in a vast web of instantaneous communication that spanned the galaxy. The human maintenance crews had designed elegant redundancy into the system. They'd also been the only ones who fully understood how that redundancy worked. When Theta 9 went dark, its load shifted to neighboring stations. Those stations, already running at reduced efficiency without human engineers, began experiencing cascade failures. Within 3 days, 20% of the Ansible network was operating on emergency protocols. Communication delays that hadn't existed for 500 years suddenly reappeared. Messages that should have been instantaneous now took hours or days. Interstellar commerce, which relied on split-second trading and coordination, began to fracture. The Sarathi shipping magnate Vexashan watched his fortune crumble in real time. Without precise navigation data provided by human astrocartographers, his fleet's jump calculations included margins of error that tripled travel times. Competitors who'd retained more human personnel had significant advantages, but there were fewer humans to go around, and those positions had already been filled. I'll pay triple rates for human navigators, he broadcast across every hiring network. No one responded. The humans weren't negotiating. They were simply gone. In the medical sectors, the crisis deepened. The Vexthari warrior clans, who'd spent centuries perfecting combat techniques while relegating medicine to support personnel, discovered that their own doctors had forgotten crucial skills. Procedures that humans performed routinely, xenobiological transplants, multi-species trauma response, regenerative therapies for non-Vexthari physiology, were suddenly beyond their capability. Dr. Kraleth, chief of surgery at the primary military hospital, stood in his operating theater surrounded by equipment he only partially understood. Before him lay a wounded soldier who would have lived with human intervention. Now, with only Vexithari knowledge available, survival was uncertain. "How did we let this happen?" he asked his staff. "How did we build an entire medical system dependent on another species and never bother to learn their techniques?" No one answered. They were too busy trying to keep their patient alive. In the agricultural zones, Draxi farmers discovered that human-engineered crop varieties, specially designed to grow in alien soils and feed multiple species efficiently, required maintenance protocols that had never been properly documented. The humans had kept the knowledge in their heads, passed down through apprenticeship and hands-on training. Young Draxi agronomist Vensha stood in fields of withering crops, holding a datapad full of incomplete instructions, cross-reference genetic sequences with mineral content ratios. Adjust pH based on seasonal variation. The words were there, but the intuitive understanding of how to apply them was missing. She'd worked alongside human farmers for 5 years. She'd watched them work, even asked occasional questions, but she'd never really learned. She'd assumed they'd always be there to ask. Across council space, similar scenes played out. Systems that had run smoothly for generations suddenly revealed themselves as dependent on human expertise that other species had never valued enough to acquire themselves. The panic began. The investigator Shalvex of the Council, Intelligence Service, prided himself on solving impossible cases. But the human exodus presented a unique challenge. There was no crime to investigate, no conspiracy to unravel. Just an entire species that had quietly, legally, and methodically removed itself from the galactic community. His team spent weeks analyzing the patterns. What they found was humbling. The preparation was extraordinary, Shalvex reported to the Council. They purchased decommissioned ships through proper channels, always paying fair market value. They accumulated supplies through legitimate trade. They filed all required departure documentation. Everything was legal. "How did we miss it?" demanded Councillor Vrax. "We didn't miss it," Shalvex replied flatly. "We ignored it. Because they were humans and we didn't think they mattered enough to monitor closely." He displayed a timeline hologram spanning 70 years. It started after the failed petition for council representation in 2155. That's when human trade in decommissioned vessels increased by 300%. They called it a cultural revival, returning to their roots as space explorers. We thought it was quaint. The hologram shifted. In 2167, humans established the Heritage Fund, supposedly to preserve human culture and history. It collected small contributions from human workers across council space. We approved it without investigation because the amount seemed insignificant. "How insignificant?" asked Keshmora. 70 billion credits accumulated over 60 years. More than enough to fuel their exodus. The council chamber erupted in disbelief. 70 billion credits gathered in amounts too small to trigger financial monitoring systems. Millions of humans contributing a few credits each month for decades, building the foundation of their departure. They also, Shalvex continued, systematically trained the next generation in self-sufficiency. Every human child in council space received education in engineering, medicine, agriculture, and resource management, well beyond standard requirements. They built redundancy into their own population. Ambassador Silvera leaned forward. Did they leave any indication of where they went? Only this. Shalvex displayed a recovered data archive found in an abandoned human cultural center. It's a collection of human history, their journals, experiences, observations about life in council space. I think they wanted us to find it. To understand. He opened a file at random. A video recording appeared, showing an elderly human woman in the simple coveralls of a station maintenance worker. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," she said in galactic standard, her Earth-accented voice tired but steady. "I've worked at Station Kepler 47 for 38 years. I've fixed your air recyclers, your water systems, your power grids. I've done good work and I'm proud of it. But I want my grandchildren to grow up in a place where they're not just the people who fix things for others, where they can build something that's truly theirs." She smiled, not with bitterness but with quiet determination. "We're not leaving in anger. We're leaving because it's time to go home, even if home is a place we haven't built yet. Thank you for the years we shared. We wish you well." The recording ended. The council sat in silence. There are thousands of these, Shalvek said quietly. Personal messages, observations, memories. Not one expresses hatred. Not one threatens revenge. They simply said goodbye, in their own way, to no one in particular, and then they left. Councillor Threnix, the youngest member of the council, spoke hesitantly. Can we contact them? Send messages of apology? Offers to negotiate? Shalvek shook his head. We've been trying. Broadcasting on all frequencies, sending probe ships to their last known trajectories. If they're receiving our messages, they're not responding. The silence is absolute. Perhaps, Keshimura said softly, that's the point. Words failed them for centuries. Now they're showing us that actions speak louder. The weight of 700 million absent voices settled over the chamber. Month 1. Cascading failures. By the 30th day of the human absence. The term cascade failure had entered common usage across council space. It described the domino effect rippling through every major system. One failure triggering another, which triggered 3 more, exponentially multiplying until entire sectors faced collapse. The Ansible network was now operating at 42% capacity. Councillor Miraeth of the Luxari stood in the primary communications hub on Luxara Prime, watching technicians struggle with repair procedures that should have been routine. The quantum entanglement matrices are destabilizing, reported Chief Technician Volkan, his voice tight with frustration. We're following the human maintenance protocols exactly, but something's wrong. The resonance frequencies keep drifting out of phase. Miraeth examined the technical manual, a document written by human engineers translated into galactic standard. The instructions were precise, the diagrams clear, but something was missing. The Luxari technicians were brilliant theorists, but they'd never actually performed these repairs. They'd always called the human maintenance teams. The manual says to adjust for harmonic drift based on ambient field conditions, Vulcan continued. But it doesn't explain how to sense the drift or what adjustment range to use. It's like they assumed the reader would know. Because they did know, Miraeth said quietly. The humans who wrote this had done the repair 1,000 times. They understood it intuitively. They never realized their documentation was incomplete, because they never imagined we'd have to do it without them. The relay station's failure warning alarms began to sound. Another node going dark. Another few dozen systems losing instantaneous communication. In the Vexthari military sectors, the medical crisis had evolved from emergency to catastrophe. General Krathik stood in what had once been the most advanced trauma center in the fleet, now a monument to dependence and regret. Casualty report, he commanded. His medical officer, Dr. Shenval, consulted his datapad with trembling hands. 17 fatalities this week from injuries that should have been survivable. Our mortality rate is up 400% since the humans departed. We're losing soldiers to wounds that their doctors would have considered routine. What about the training programs? The human medical databases? We have the databases, General. Thousands of hours of instructional videos, detailed surgical procedures, pharmaceutical formulas, but Shenval gestured helplessly at the operating theater. Learning surgery from videos is like learning to pilot a warship by reading the manual. The humans had decades of hands-on experience, trained by other humans who had trained for decades. They had institutional knowledge passed down through generations. We're starting from zero. Krathix clenched his fists. We're warriors. We've conquered star systems. How can we be defeated by the absence of doctors? Because we focused on conquest, Shenval replied, his voice barely a whisper. And we let someone else handle the consequences. The economic collapse was equally devastating. The Sarathi Trade Confederation, the economic powerhouse of council space, was hemorrhaging wealth at unprecedented rates. Trade Minister Vexthon stood before the Confederation Council, his scaled features showing the stress cracks of sleepless nights. We've lost 63% of our shipping efficiency. Navigation errors have caused 17 major accidents. Insurance rates have quadrupled. Competitors who maintained better relations with their human employees are dominating markets we've controlled for centuries. Then hire more humans, demanded Council Head Sharvex. There are no more humans. Vexthon's voice cracked. That's the point. We've sent recruiters to every border station, offered salaries 10 times what we paid before. No response. The humans are gone and they're not coming back for money. Across the Confederation's territory, Shipping lanes that had operated like clockwork for 500 years descended into chaos. Without human astrocartographers constantly updating navigation data, jump point calculations included margins of error that turned 3-day journeys into week-long odysseys. Cargo spoiled. Perishable goods arrived worthless. Just-in-time manufacturing ground to a halt. On the agricultural worlds, the crisis manifested in empty plates and hungry populations. The Draxi farming communities, which had fed billions across council space, watched their yields plummet. Agronomist Venshaw had spent the month trying desperately to save her crops. She'd consulted every database, interviewed the few elderly Draxi farmers who remembered pre-human agricultural methods, even attempted to recreate the techniques from historical records. Nothing worked. The problem, explained her mentor, old farmer Kreshal, is that humans saw agriculture as both science and art. They understood the chemistry, yes, but they also felt the land. They could walk through a field and sense problems before instruments detected them. They adapted in real time. Vensha looked at her dying crops, hybrid varieties engineered by human geneticists to grow in Draxi soil while providing nutrition for 17 different species. Marvels of bioengineering that required constant adjustment and intuitive care. We treated them as laborers, she said bitterly. We paid them minimum wages to perform miracles and we never bothered to learn how they did it. Now, Kreshal replied, we'll learn, or we'll starve. The social unrest began in the 3rd week. Protests erupted on industrial worlds where populations faced food shortages and communication blackouts. Labor disputes flared as species blamed each other for over-reliance on human workers. Political factions formed around accusations of negligence and incompetence. On the colony world of Threshkai, riots broke out when the water purification system failed. It had been maintained by a team of 3 human engineers for 20 years. Local authorities had never trained replacements, never documented the custom modifications the humans had made to adapt the system to Threshkai's unique chemistry. Governor Telshar watched her city burn and understood that the fires weren't just about water. They were about the sudden, terrifying realization that her civilization was built on foundations she didn't understand and couldn't maintain. The humans had been everywhere, fixing, improving, sustaining, and no one had noticed until they were gone. Desperate measures by the 2nd month. Desperation drove the council to unprecedented action. They assembled the largest deep space expedition in galactic history. 300 ships carrying scientists, diplomats, and supplies, all dedicated to a single mission: find the humans and bring them back. Fleet Commander Zarthek of the Kryn stood on the bridge of the flagship Reconciliation, staring at the stellar charts. The human fleet had headed beyond the Veil Nebula, into a region of space the Council had always considered worthless. Low resource density, unstable star systems, harsh radiation environments. Why would they choose this? His navigator wondered aloud. There are better territories available. We've offered humans colony charters and Class A systems. Because it's far from us, Zarthek replied. And because they didn't want a charter. They wanted independence. The expedition pushed deeper into unexplored space than most council ships had ever ventured. They broadcast messages on all frequencies, apologies, offers of negotiation, promises of reform. They sent recordings of council members admitting mistakes, acknowledging human contributions, pledging better treatment. Only silence answered. 3 months into the expedition, they found the first clue, a navigation beacon clearly human-made, transmitting a simple repeating message in Earth languages. Turn back. This is not your space. You are not welcome here. At least we know they're alive, noted Science Officer Vrelshaw. And that they don't want to be found, Zarthek added grimly. They pushed forward anyway. Another month of searching led them to a debris field. Not wreckage, but deliberately abandoned materials. Old hull plating, exhausted fuel cells, worn-out equipment. The refuse of a fleet in transit. Managing resources carefully. The xenoarchaeologist on the team, a Luxari named Shal Win, examined the debris with growing respect. They're not just surviving out here, they're thriving. Look at these modification patterns. They've adapted their ships for long-term deep space operation. They're building something permanent. How far could they have gone? Zarthek asked. Shalwin ran calculations, factoring in the age of the debris and the capabilities of human ships. Based on this trajectory, they could be 500 light-years beyond our current position. In the galactic sparse zone, 500 light-years, a distance that would take the expedition years to cross even with the best council ships. We can't sustain a pursuit that long, Zarthek admitted. We'll have to turn back. As the fleet prepared to return home, they encountered one final human artifact, a massive data buoy, clearly positioned to be found. It contained a message but also a powerful encryption system that took weeks to decode. When they finally accessed the contents, the flagship's bridge fell silent. The message was a video compilation, showing scenes of human life in council space over the past century. Not propaganda, not accusations, just documentation. Humans working double shifts while receiving half pay. Human children denied entry to prestigious academies despite superior qualifications. Human scientists making breakthrough discoveries that were credited to their alien supervisors. Human diplomats waiting decades for meetings that were never scheduled. The images were damning not because they showed deliberate cruelty, but because they showed casual indifference. Humans being overlooked, undervalued, dismissed as background elements in someone else's story. At the end, a single text message appeared. We do not seek your apology. We do not require your recognition. We sought these things for 200 years and received neither. Now we seek only distance. You have your galaxy. We will build our own future. Do not follow. This is goodbye. The transmission coordinates indicated it had been placed there years ago, long before the Exodus. The humans had known the Council would eventually search for them. They'd prepared this message in advance, final and absolute. Commander Zarthek ordered the fleet home. There was nothing more to find. The truth revealed, the data buoy's contents sparked fierce debates across Council space. Some leaders claimed the human documentation was exaggerated, taken out of context. Others recognized the truth they'd been avoiding. It was Ambassador Keshmora who forced the full reckoning. She compiled her own investigation, cross-referencing the human records with Council archives. What she presented to the emergency Council session was a comprehensive indictment of 2 centuries of systemic exploitation. The humans documented everything, she told the assembled representatives. Every denied petition, every broken promise, every example of discrimination. They kept records because they hoped, for generations, that evidence would eventually persuade us to change. She displayed payroll data. Human engineers earned, on average, 43% of what we paid our own citizens for identical work. We justified this by claiming humans were less experienced. But this disparity persisted even for humans with decades of service. The charts were irrefutable. Educational access, she continued. The prestigious Technical Institute of Luxara Prime accepted 17% of qualified human applicants versus 72% of equally qualified Luxari applicants. When human parents protested, they were told their children should prove themselves through excellence. Many did. It didn't matter. More data scrolled across the displays. Housing discrimination, medical care disparities, social segregation masked as cultural preferences. And the council seats, Keshmora said, her voice heavy. Humanity petitioned for representation 47 times over 200 years. We denied them every time. Our reasoning? They were too new to the galactic stage. Too fractious. Too emotional. We said they needed to demonstrate worthiness through service. She paused, letting the irony sink in.